Welcome to the Pharma Source podcast. Today's interview is with Kurt Nielsen, formerly President and CEO of Pharmaceuticals International Inc., PII. Kurt has a long track record of leadership roles within both pharma and contract manufacturing companies. We talk about innovation, some of the current market trends in the US, and based on his extensive experience on both sides of the fence, he offers some really valuable advice about the kind of incentives that sponsors can use to get the best out of contract service providers. I hope you enjoy the interview. Wondering how to introduce you, Kurt, because looking through your experience, there's just so much of it in leadership roles on both the buy side and the sell side of pharma. Former president and CEO at Pharmaceuticals International Inc., PII, president of Lupin, VP at Sandoz, SVP at Catalent, EVP at Teva, and more. How do you describe your experience?
Well, that's a really good question to get things started. I tell people that it's my job to unlock the superpowers of the people that are around me. And I just happen to do that, in the pharmaceutical business. The reason why I absolutely love, the pharmaceutical business and healthcare is that the work that we do on a daily basis, on an annual basis, makes a difference in people's lives. Set aside all the kind of the politics and what anybody thinks about who's making, profit and who's not. At the end of the day, we help people feel better, cure disease, treat disease. And I think it's just an amazing place to work. And so that's how I describe to people what I do, right? I love to work with people, unlock their superpowers. And when we do that, we bring new products to market that ease your pain, cure your disease, whether that's for you or your family member. And that's how I describe what I do.
One of the fascinating things I think about life sciences is how the whole industry really is geared around innovation and progress, trying to push new therapies through the pipeline. Quite an interesting tension, I think, between innovation being right at the core of the industry, but also, on the other hand, being fairly risk averse because you're putting things into people's bodies. So I thought what could be a good conversation to have is around that whole area of innovation and how do you do it? How do you run innovation projects within your own org and deliver better outcomes with CDMOs and CRO partners?
Well, Luke, you didn't tell me this is going to be a lot of work to be a podcast guest. I mean, you're 2 for 2 on absolutely awesome questions.
Maybe if we could start actually with defining innovation. What does innovation mean to you, Kurt?
Innovation is bringing something new into existence that will do some good in the world. That's what I think about is innovation. And so therefore, for me, definition of innovation can apply to how we develop a product, the product that we develop. It can also apply to software, can apply to, obviously, AI and ML. So it's about bringing something new into existence that's going to do some good in the world. That's how I think about innovation.
And are there any particular technologies which you think are making a particular impact at the moment, and are probably at an early stage still, which haven't been fully exploited yet by the pharma industry, some promising technologies?
I think generally speaking, at least in the time I've been in pharma, when it comes to new technology and what we'll call breakthrough innovation has been, I'll say, conservative, and has to my eye, kind of the viewpoint or the behavior that we want to be first to be second. So I think really no matter where we would all look in what we've been doing in pharma, I think we could all kind of see areas where there's more innovation, that there's areas where there's quite a bit of untapped potential. I think no conversation about innovation and untapped potential is complete, at least without a mention of the applications of artificial intelligence and machine learning. The ability to deal with larger data sets, like beyond what, the human mind, even with, the current statistical analysis tools can grapple with, I think is something that we still haven't even scratched the surface with. I think the robust application of generative large language AI models, again, we're just scratching the
Mhm.
surface with that. In terms of just being efficiency enhancement tools for what we do, let alone providing deeper insights. So I know there's some areas like in pharmacovigilance, where we're seeing those deeper insights. But I think there's just so much runway ahead of us there. I think when it comes to then also newer drug delivery technologies, again, I think this is an area where um, we as an industry need to lean into this more. So very specifically, I would say for lipid nanoparticles.
Mhm.
I mean, therapeutic mRNA, we know it works, right? So obviously we know the vaccines work. But it's a very different game when you're looking at delivering a therapeutic vaccine. Targeting is very important. And so we need ways to functionalize these LNPs or lipid nanoparticles so they can be delivered to the right part of the body and that mRNA can get to the right place. And I think up until now, again, the kind of the attitude or the position that the farm industry is taking, let's somebody else do this. Let them be first. Let them de-risk it, and then we'll take up the mantle and run with it. And I think if there's anything that COVID has, I think, taught the world is that when we all get focused on a particular topic and we force concentrate what we're doing, great things can happen. And I think that's an area of I'll say applied innovation, how you get innovation done that I think would be great for all of us to see more of. Those are just a
Mm.
couple of examples that come
Yeah,
to
yeah.
mind.
Out of all of those different routes that people could take, where would you start? I mean, if you were advising a startup biotech, for example, is there,
Yeah.
one or two technologies you think that they should be looking at over others?
I think for startups, I think it's really important for you to take a look at how you can get the most out of the staff that you have. So
Mm.
I do think that the management of large amounts of data and large amounts of information, I think is absolutely an enabler because those insights are going to be very important for your investors. And I think those insights are going to be very important for what you need to accomplish, whether you're in preclinical or clinical development. And so I think those tools that allow you to deal with large amounts of data, right? So I think again, the AI, the machine learning, you don't have to have those capabilities in house and developing all these things on your own, but be smart about leveraging what's already out there. I think it's a force multiplier, and I think for the companies that are going to be early adopters there, they're going to be able to stay ahead of the curve. I think again when it comes to technologies, I think if when we're talking about companies that are doing preclinical and clinical development. Here again, many companies these days are they use an outsourced model, right? So you've been building
Mm.
this amazing community, and I think it's about making sure that the technologies that um, your partner, I'll say your partners or your service providers have are top notch. You're you're paying for that service, and I think the expectation for the startup should be that this is the best piece of equipment, this is the best asset, people who can do the assay development, and you've got the best tools for data management, and data security. And so I think, Luke, it's maybe less about the technologies that the startup has, but making sure that they're being discerning and demanding from their providers about the level of technology, that they're providing, not just in the science, but then also in the data management and the data protection. These are all, I
Yeah.
think, like really important topics for startups.
Let's talk then about working with those outsourced partners and how to get the best out of them. You've clearly got lots of experience working on this CRO, the contract services side of things. What would be the best way to align their strategic goals, their economic incentives in a way that they're going to be aligned with you and go above and beyond what the contract says?
When it comes to economic incentives, I just think it's underappreciated. If anybody's kind of a reader of Freakonomics, it's just sort of very interesting that human beings, they respond to economic incentives. We ignore that at our own peril. And so I think it may seem a little clinical, meaning unemotional or draconian, but I think putting incentive contracts in place for timely performance, and having those incentives also be aligned with not just on-time delivery, whether you're talking about development or commercialization, but also with respect to quality. On-time delivery and quality are table stakes for all of us in this business. You have to deliver those things. Whether you're in-house and have your own team, or you're working with a service provider, and then having an incentive that's linked to, again, delivering that baseline performance, but then also on-time delivery or early delivery. Those types of contracts, and I've been inside at service providers, and when we've had those contracts, they're talked about differently.
Hmm.
And I think that's exactly what a buyer wants. And I think the other thing that I think is really important is to, again, using a term that's been around for a while, is having the right operating mechanisms, or social operating mechanisms, as was talked about in the book Execution. It's a great book, and there's a lot of great lessons in there still to be kind of relearned, from Ram Charan and Larry Bossidy. But having operating mechanisms in place, social operating mechanisms in place that allow for uh, open and honest and real, transparent, discussion about what's happening and why, and then making sure that there's enough trust that in between the meetings where you having your operating mechanisms, that when the inevitable challenges pop up, that the communication is free and easy, right? It's not
Hmm.
about being right. It's not about being wrong. It's about being focused on the task at hand and delivering. And I think those things are really important. And I think not enough attention is paid to making sure that the relationship is strong enough that kind of in between meetings, that the communication is robust and it's good and it's quick, and that when something doesn't go the way that it should, at your service provider, that they call you and they let you know, and vice versa. When you reach out to them, that they get back to you right away and say, "Listen, I don't have an answer for you right now, but I'll get back to you tomorrow."
Above and beyond, I guess, putting into the contract milestones around hitting particular KPIs. Going beyond that, are there any different approaches or models that you'd recommend so that both sides become equally invested in a project?
Yeah, I think sometimes there can be some benefits to how liability is distributed and shared between the parties. Sometimes it can be difficult to kind of find a good balance there. But I think when you do find a balance point, between both parties, I think what you find is that people are willing to move faster. I mean, not be reckless, of course, but
Mhm.
but to move faster, potentially take some risk on their own. And the reason why I've raised that is typically it's usually a zero-sum game, right? The provider doesn't want to take any risk, and um, the buyer doesn't want to take any risk. But I think, again, once you've got a core um, relationship around trust, and you've got the right metrics in place, I think um, having, again, it's a different form of a financial incentive, right? Where there's some room for each party to kind of operate and not have to kind of fear extreme economic repercussions, I think I've seen, again, work really well.
Hmm.
I think, having a very clear escalation, process, if you will, or information sharing process, for reporting and any kind of resolution, I think is also just an excellent practice. I often find that in contracts, there's quite a bit of attention paid to, the scope of work and what has to be delivered, but a lot less attention paid to the practicalities of, well, what if we don't agree? What if we don't understand each other? How are we going to actually work through that?
Mm.
Um, that's part of what I think can create an open and transparent relationship about what's happening, and why. And I think maybe the last thing I would say is, having some open conversations around, um, what does anybody expect when it comes to change orders, right? I mean, inevitably things happen, right?
Hmm.
And I think that, depending on what each party is kind of thinking about, I've also seen it work quite well that there's some language in these contracts around change orders, right? There's some scoping that's put in for, let's say, levels of complexity, as it relates to some risk management work that's been done before the project starts. And so it's just kind of clear that if this issue pops up, it falls into tier A of change orders, and here's the
Mm.
people who need to be involved in that discussion. And then there's obviously higher levels. It's a bit like a kind of a grant of authority matrix, right? That you'd see, with respect to approvals inside of most companies these days. So those are some of the, I'll say, better or best practices I've seen in contracting. They take some more time, obviously, Luke, but when you put that time in the beginning, it also gives you a lot of really interesting clues and texture around how does your partner do business.
Yeah.
And if they're not willing to have those conversations, or they get rigid, look, you may still decide you want to work with that company because they have the skills and experience that you need. But those are signals nonetheless that need to be kind of kept in mind, right? That's how they're going to be moving forward.
Interesting. What role does the regulator have to play in enabling or holding back innovation? And I guess any tips or any advice you've got for working successfully with the FDA and others?
I've been in the pharma business 30 years, and sometimes I can hardly believe it's been 30 years. Over time, what I've learned is, or what I think I've learned is, that regulators, no matter where they are in the world, they're all trying to do the right thing, right? They want to
Mm.
make sure that the products that they approve are safe for the people who really need them, right? And that they're going to provide benefit. And that how they communicate that can be misunderstood, right? And the most important thing, or the best piece of advice I can give to anybody, whether you're junior or senior in this business, is always put on the lens that the person who's providing the feedback really does have the best interests of public health, like, in their mind. And so when I do that, it helps me understand that, look, I actually do need more data, right? And maybe I didn't think about it, completely. And, okay, let's go get that data because we need to answer that question. To avoid that, it's important to have dialogue with the regulators. All regulators across the globe have mechanisms by which you can have interactions with them early in the development process. Again, I would advocate um, less. Um, less concern about kind of, as I would say, mom or dad saying no, and a
Mhm.
lot more about, let me explain to you, mom and dad, why we think this is important, what we're doing, and be open to what you hear back from the regulators, because in many cases they've seen 100 times more than what we have, by the very nature of where they sit in the in the ecosystem. So I think that with a different mindset, I think we can turn the relationship with the regulators into a net accelerator. And I think most regulatory bodies at this day and age, even the FDA, are looking for ways to move the process along faster, right? If we take a look at what's happening with fast track designations, accelerated approvals. There's formal programs around that. There's even formal programs at the FDA around having advanced manufacturing technologies reviewed, even at their kind of infancy and pilot stages. So I think it just all comes down to being confident in what you know, what you want to do, what your pathway is, having an appreciation for what the regulators are out to do, and
Mhm.
then working with them to strike that balance. But I have found over 30 years that when I'm open to those conversations, ultimately the result we get is better, and that's what's better for patients.
As we're talking, Kurt, there seem to be all sorts of noises coming out of US Congress around areas like biosecurity. Biden himself was saying that he'd beaten Big Pharma recently, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
I just wonder what your take is on what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, it's again, it's very interesting. It's the effect of the rise of nationalism and populism.
Hmm.
And I think it's been bubbling along for a while. I think these ideas have been underarticulated. I think more and more people in the United States are talking about healthcare like many other people do, across the globe, that healthcare is not a privilege, but it's a right, and that more needs to be done to truly provide accessibility and increase the quality of care. So I think that's ultimately what's driving the political rhetoric these days. I think there's certainly other stakeholders, Luke, in my view, and that's probably the topic of another podcast,
Hmm.
right? Or someone else who's an expert in this. There's other people who have their hand in the cookie jar, right? If that's a phrase that'll translate to your global audience, but
I
there's
think so.
there's a lot of people who have their hand in the profit pool here, and so yes, pharma is one entity, right, or one group of stakeholders, but there's many, many, many others, and I think at some point in the future, it'll be very clear that there's some other hands in that cookie jar that are, have fistfuls of cash, and it's questionable what value they're bringing to the, to the table.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of a shot across the bow to all of healthcare and all the intermediaries that are involved in healthcare and are taking profit out to um, keep a watchful eye, right, about what's happening. And I think it's also kind of very interesting what's happening with the Biosecure Act. I think that again, if you're going to call it a shadow or a hangover from the pandemic, is that global supply chains have been fantastic in a era of low inflation and zero cost of money. Um, but what it's exposed is that while you can access products and services at a low cost, say compared to the local geography, you just don't have the same security if you were providing those services and doing that manufacturing either in a region or in a country.
Hmm.
And I think that pendulum is going to continue to swing back from truly globalized supply chains, which happened over the last 20 or 25 years, to a different mix of, local, regional, and global. I mean, not all supply chains that have globalized are going to be able to be regionalized, but I think those that can be will be. And I think that that's going to be the new reality. Governments are deploying their own cash to enable these things to happen. There's been plenty of other countries outside the United States that have been providing tax incentives for years
Hmm.
around making capital investments in facilities in their countries in order to kind of facilitate, having this, sophisticated manufacturing infrastructure, readily available and not being kind of held hostage to a pandemic or any sort of other geopolitical whim. So um, I think there's been a lot of talk about it over the last 25 years. I definitely think there's going to be some changes. It's not going to swing all the way back to the way it was. But I do think we're going to find a new balance point and a new normal, over the next 3 to 5 years, Luke.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for your insightful views on that. Just to wrap up, Kurt, you're currently running your Longview Leader business. I wonder if you could just introduce that, please, and just tell us about the kind of services that you do at Longview. Who do you work with?
Very good. A little bit about our founder story. I think would tell you maybe a little bit about what we do and why we do it. But founded the company with my sister. We lived in a subdivision called Longview Farms, and
Hmm.
the way our parents raised us, they said, "To whom much is given, much is expected." So be a leader.
Hmm.
And so we, in order, just a little homage to our parents, we said, let's name the company Longview Leader because of the lessons we learned as kids. But we
Thank you for
do a
listening.
number of different things, but primarily, Luke, we advise companies on continuous improvement and asset management. And we have an M&A practice in pharma and pharma services. And then we also do commercial excellence. We have a
Hmm.
commercial excellence practice. I'd say 50% of our customers are pharma services companies, and 50% are pharma companies of varying sizes, from so small startups all the way to, I'll say, substantial publicly traded companies. And we also then do quite a bit of work with risk management and assessing risks, and then how to manage and reduce those risks. And that's the type of work that we
Okay.
do. It's actually been an amazing journey being an entrepreneur. I mean, it's one of the things that attracted me to reach out to you is your entrepreneurial journey, and
Hmm.
I think that there's a lot of good to be done in the world for all of us.
Yeah, and a fascinating time to be doing it.
Absolutely. Well said.
Kurt, thank you so much for your time today. Pleasure speaking to you.
Yeah, very good, sir. Thank you again.
For more insights into the business of pharma and biotech, sign up to pharmasource.global. And thank you for listening.